Hello, everybody. How are you? Thank you for answering me. Really appreciate that. It's always nice to speak in Europe. Hello, camera person. How's it going? I'm going to be moving around a lot, so just get ready for it. This is a little bit longer of a walk to the podium than I would have expected. All right, I want to make sure that we're okay here, guys, because I've got 2 talks on ASP NET MVC, and I want to make sure that we set expectations. So if you, I think that's how you spell it. If you need to go, that's okay. Just go ahead and go. I want to make sure you understand, though. You probably read the directions. This is a basics introduction 101 type class. They marked it in the thing as a 300 class, but they called it a 300 basics introduction. So that's kind of like a 300 level basics introduction to calculus. But this is the basics course. So we're going to start at File New Project, and we'll go from there. Then this afternoon, you've got a talk from Fritz Onion, who will be talking about converting web forms to MVC. And then after that, I'll go and do advanced super ninja trips. See, he already left. That guy left. This is the advanced course. We just wanted to get rid of that guy. Somebody tell him. Now, he left probably because I just said it was a basics course. And it is. But I think that even if you're using MVC on a regular basis, you'll probably learn something. But I just wanted to set expectations that I am assuming that you have yet to do things with MVC, or perhaps you've downloaded it, played around with it, but that you're not actually making money right now professionally with MVC. That won't be annoying at all, actually, if we do that. I'll probably mute that for a second. All right, so let's do this. I'm assuming that you've used ASP.NET and you're familiar generally with web development. Thank goodness that I'm up there as well, because you not being able to see me right now, I'm in 2 places. Is there any way to make it so that fills up the screen? I guess not. Oh my God. When did this happen? Somebody needs to make a call. Oh no. All right, well hopefully you guys will be able to see this. Is this how it was for Anders' thing? I was asleep. Not here. I wasn't like asleep here. I love Anders. Is he in the room? All right, let's do it like this. So I'm going to say File New Project, and I'll bring up an ASP.NET MVC application. And we're going to do it like that because that screen is way too small. And this dialog box pops up. This dialog box is owned by ASP.NET MVC. And I point that out because when you say File New Project, that first dialog box is owned by Visual Studio. As soon as I selected MVC as a new project type, and this popped up, this dialog is owned by MVC. This is a little bit of an important thing. This dialog is an extension point. You can actually get in here and change things. It's giving me 2 choices. It's saying, yes, I want to create a unit test project, which is interesting. It's the first ASP.NET application project type that actually lets you make a unit test at the same time. And there's a little link down here in the corner that says additional info. That'll take you off to a blog post that will give you details about how you can get into that dropdown. So if you want to use like MBUnit or XUnit.net or NUnit or any other unit testing software, or maybe your company has your own unit testing software, you can get in there and then make an initial test project that uses the unit testing system that you want. So that's the first choice. Yes, create a unit test project, or no, I'm a bad person. So I'm going to click no. And this is going to create our first ASP.NET project. I was asking them earlier what the resolution of the screen was. I said, because I always like to know the resolution of the screen. Apparently it's 16 by 9. And they said, oh, hey, I disappeared. Thank you, video guy. We did not need to see that every time I turned around. That was bad. The resolution of the screen is like 3072 by 1000, I don't know, million something something. It's like super high def. I did not know if my machine would push that kind of resolution, but then I realized he was telling me the native resolution of the projector. So we've got a couple of folders here that you don't typically see in an ASP.NET application. You've got controllers, models, and views. That explains the whole MVC thing. Now we could go through and I could show you slides that would be kind of like, you know, educational slides about what exactly we're seeing. And I'll show you actually the kind of slides that I could show you. I could be like, yeah, see, maybe we could get a picture of me in front of this. See, camera guy just left. He just pointed it that way and then took off. I don't know if that means I'm being filmed anymore at all, so I can probably do anything I want to. We'll see if that shows up online later. Maybe he's mad. Maybe he's mad. I could show you things like this, and maybe someone who has a camera could take a picture of me explaining MVC. This is an action pose. Right? And then we got to get another shot of the entire room who's like, model view controller. Oh, thank you, 3 circles. Oh, thank goodness you put up a slide with 3 circles. Now I understand it. I did not understand model view controller, and those 3 circles did not help me. So I'm going to try something a little bit different. All right, let's do this. Let's go and grab our home controller. We're going to run this application, see what this guy looks like. This is the Hello World application. This is what you get out of the box. Welcome to MVC. We get 2 tabs. We can switch between them. And you can notice that little /home/about. Nice clean URL that doesn't broadcast .aspx. So you can't actually look at this and tell what it's written in just by looking at the URLs. This is a selling point. This is a good thing. You know the guys that run Stack Overflow, Jeff Atwood? When they first started StackOverflow.com, one of the first compliments they got was from a guy named Obi Fernandez who said, was this written in Rails? And they thought that was really great because the entire thing is written in LINQ to SQL and ASP.NET MVC. But a Rails guy moved around the site and he felt that it had that Rails aesthetic. Now, this isn't about Rails, but it's about the new web aesthetic. And ASP.NET MVC supports that. People like that a lot. And ASP.NET 4, as I'll probably be able to show you tomorrow, allows you to have these kind of URLs in web forms as well. So I say /home/about. Let's go ahead and come over here, hit a breakpoint there, and I'm going to just hit F5. So rather than showing 3 circles and reading books and stuff, we'll learn MVC this way. So I'm going to click on /home/about, and I got here. So you can learn a lot by not looking at the manual. We just hit /home/about, and then I'm here. So I navigated in the browser, a miracle happened, and I'm sitting right here. How exactly is this going on, and how is this going to help me learn MVC better? Let's go and spend some time in the call stack, because I think that every good technical presentation that's held in a cathedral or whatever this place is deserves a Microsoft guy saying, look how simple it is. You see? It's just so obvious. All right. We are sitting in home controller about. I hit /home. Somebody else made a home controller. There's no code in my system that said new home controller. Somebody else called /about. So that right there tells me something interesting. I could probably make a guess, remembering that I don't know anything about MVC and I'm learning, and I could maybe copy-paste this, change the name of the method. Is that a bad word here? I hope not. I was walking down by the Anne Frank thing, and there was a street that was called Van Poot. Is that a bad word? Because it was kind of it's a little bit off color in the States. I could have called that the poot method. I'm going to say /home/poop. I have babies, so that's why I've got poop on the mind. Not literally, but you know. So I just hit /home/poop, and now I'm here. So that right there, we're starting to absorb new bits of information. We're starting to learn a little bit more about how this works. In the old Microsoft days, I probably would have edited a config file, and there would have been some XML involved to do this right here. In order to map that URL to a particular method, I would be in the web config, and the web config would get really big. But right off the bat, we can see that there's a direct relationship so far between what's going on in the URL and what's going on in my application. Just by naming it poop and calling it from that URL, I show up here. So let's look at our call stack, figure out what's going on. We'll start at the bottom. This is the great thing about here is that the question is, are the Dutch too nice to leave at this point in the conversation? I really want to go. Maybe I could put my collar up and he wouldn't notice me leaving. Seriously, though, notice on the left-hand side, and I think one of the things that's funny about showing a call stack at a presentation is that a lot of people think that they know programming, but then they realize that, wow, I haven't really looked at a call stack or spent any time in this window in months. The closer you are to the business, the less likely it is you spend any time here. You know what I mean? But this is the documentation. This is the place to learn about things. And if I'm assuming that you guys don't know a whole lot about ASP.NET MVC, there's a lot to be learned from looking at a call stack. See that first part there where it says MS Core Lib? This is very important. That's the library that we're currently looking at. So MS Core Lib, Microsoft Common Object Runtime Library. So there's your CLR. Blah, 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 CLR, blah, blah, blah. That's how we read call stacks in the States. Now it says WebDev Web Host 40. That's the tiny web server that comes with Visual Studio. So the .NET Framework has fired up. The tiny web server started up. On socket accept. Somebody types in a URL. I'm accepting the TCP socket. Blah, blah, blah. Web host request process. That sounds good. Now we're looking at system.web process request. So we're inside of HTTP runtime. System.web, for ASP.NET Web Forms developers, and hello in the back right there, this is ASP.NET. But if you could put your finger on something and say, where exactly is ASP.NET? It's all about system.web. So we've just transitioned from a process that fired up, started up the .NET Framework, accepted a socket, and now it's passing it off to HTTP runtime process web. Nothing about MVC has happened yet. Blah, 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 application manager, blah, 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 execute. Now suddenly we make a transition right here. This is very important. This is where ASP.NET becomes ASP.NET MVC. And what's interesting about this and why I'm showing you this is because there's value in knowing a little bit about plumbing. So I'm going to pause that for a second, and I'm going to come down for a very special moment. It's a little transition. Dun, 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 dun. So my wife lost her wedding ring. This is a problem if you're married. She dropped it down the drain. Okay? And my wife has a master's degree, business administration, speaks 4 languages. She's very smart. She's kind of Dutch, but she's not really Dutch. So I say that because I'm trying to make sure you guys understand how very, very smart my wife is. Okay. To make up for what I'm about to say. Her mental model of a faucet and how water works begins where the faucet kind of ends. She turns the knob, a miracle happens, and water appears. It materializes at the, okay. The water goes about 6 inches and then disappears into a wormhole. So her understanding about the whole water and sewer concept worldwide is about 6 inches long. So when she lost the ring, as far as she was concerned, it had gone through a wormhole and it was, in another parallel timeline. She's not a plumber. I am also not a plumber. But my mental model extends below the drain, down about 1.5 feet to the little bendy part. I think that's the technical plumbing term, the little bendy part. And then it goes into the wall, at that point, it then enters a wormhole and then goes into a parallel timeline. I'm not a plumber. So I opened up the trap and found the ring, which to my wife, right, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I reached into the alternate timeline, into the parallel universe, and retrieved her ring from another world. And her brain exploded. That's story number one. My wife's sister came here from Zimbabwe as a 40-year-old woman with no understanding of how to drive. She just always took the bus. So I needed to teach her how to drive. So I sat down, and we had to get to the part about parallel parking. Okay, I am not a professional race car driver, but I can parallel park like a... You ever seen The Matrix? It's like one smooth motion, you know what I mean? It's just like, and it's just bam, right? Not those lame kind of like, not like that. I parallel park like Keanu Reeves. So I'm teaching my sister-in-law how to drive, and she just can't get it. She's just with my car. And I said, sister, visualize what the wheels do when you turn the wheel. And she says, well, I guess I turn the wheel, and then all four wheels turn like this. And I just can't get the car to do this. I said, no, your mental model is all wrong. The wheels, just the front wheels turn. No. Nonsense, you're lying to me. Don't tease me just because I'm new to this country. No, seriously, get out of the car. And I showed her how the back wheels don't turn, and she just... Because her mental model was there's a wheel, and then there's the shaft that goes into the dashboard, and then there's a cloud of mysterious smoke, and then wheels turn, right? But I've done Lego before, right? So my mental model includes not only steering, but also advanced suspension, because, you know, the Lego buggies have like a little suspension. And for her, I'm a mechanic. So to my family, I am also, I am a plumber and I am a mechanic. But I'm not really, but I chose to go slightly deeper. So back to call stacks and back to ASP.NET. Choose to go through the drain and maybe up at least to the wall. You don't have to go all the way to the sewage treatment plant. You don't have to learn to take apart your car and replace the spark plugs or whatever, or redo the whole manifold. But at least understand how the thing that you're holding in your hands connects to the wheels. That kind of little bit of extra something. Maybe every single one of you reads call stacks all the time. Maybe you used to and you kind of stopped. But everything that you need is usually there. And that's why I'm kind of promoting to my wife and my sister and to you guys to maybe just go a little bit farther down. Choose to be a little bit more of a plumber. You don't have to be Don Box and learn about, you know, move AX, comma 0, and, you know, that kind of level of stuff. But go a little bit deeper. So what can we learn about this transition here? Well, first we can see that it's calling an iHTTP handler. Oops, tooltips. You guys have probably made iHTTP handlers before. You use them to generate graphics dynamically. You use them to download dynamically generated files of any kind. iHTTP handler is kind of the most fundamental atom of ASP.NET proper. There are people who have never used it. There are people who just make pages. They make a page, they double-click on a page, and then page load happens. Except that's not really web programming. That's programming to a particular abstraction. We'll talk a little bit about what web forms values versus what MVC values. They value different things. In this case here, I can learn just by looking at this that iHTTP handler, and there's also async handler, as you can see, which has basically one method, process request. That's the do it method inside of ASP.NET. That is a public thing. I've done it. You've made HTTP handlers. So right now, I'm feeling good already walking through this call stack because it means that the ASP.NET MVC team didn't know something. They don't have like internal carnal knowledge of ASP.NET. They didn't pick a secret interface that we don't know about to connect in. They're playing like the rules. They're playing by the rules. They're using all the public interfaces we already used, which means that ASP.NET MVC is possibly closer to what I already know than I thought. Blah, 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 process request. Then we make a transition between MVC handler and controller base. So someone looks at that URL /home, and now suddenly I'm in the base class of a controller. Well, I remember that my controller is called the home controller, so there's probably a mapping between home and home controller. And then suddenly there's action invoker, right? Probably invokes actions. They made my controller, and they, what we say, they newed it up. They said new home controller, and then they called in this case, the poop method of that controller. Blah, 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 and then I'm there. Boom, yellow screen of death. So we made a new method called poop. We said /home/poop. The method got called. And now we're here. The view, poop or its master. Just tickles me every time. I come all the way here just to make that one joke, and it's not even a good joke. The following locations were searched. It's always nice to get a yellow screen of death that actually tells you exactly what's going on. I looked here, and I looked here, I looked here, and I looked here. Where did it get the name poop from? Why is it saying view poop? I had a method. Okay, well, it's obviously taken the name of the method. So this means that if you say return view, then it's going to look at the name of that method. And it's going to just assume. I said return view. All right? And it looked in two places, and this is really interesting. It looked in /view/home, and it looked in /view/shared. So that's interesting. That means that I can have shared views. That means I can have a home controller and a foo controller and a bar controller, and they could all potentially share the same view. And I can see also that that shared view gets called secondary. It gets called after we can't find the more specific one. So that's interesting too. That lets me know that there's a lot of convention going on inside of ASP.NET MVC. This is a big driving philosophy of ASP.NET MVC, which is convention over configuration. This is literally conventional. It went looking in the home folder for the poop method because we're in a home controller and we have the poop method. And that's it. There's no config file that describes that yet. So that's interesting. So I could go back here and I could type in, let's go ahead and say stop debugging, and we'll say index. Because we have a view called index up here already. We've used before. See if that works. And I'll type in. So that works. Or I could make a specific view. I could say add view. So now there's a file here. All right. So now we have our three circles. Well, we didn't do model, though. So with ASP.NET MVC, there technically isn't a model because it's Microsoft VC, but that doesn't kind of come off the tongue quite as nicely. We actually used to ship the models folder empty. You probably may have noticed that. With things like Ruby on Rails is an application framework that is good at making web applications that talk to databases, period. So it's not really sometimes you'll hear comparisons, like comparing .NET to Ruby on Rails. That's not really fair. And then you could say, well, ASP.NET and compare that to Ruby on Rails. And that's not really fair either, because one is much larger than the other. Here you could potentially compare ASP.NET MVC to Ruby on Rails, except Ruby on Rails prescribes the way that you talk to the back-end model. They have a very specific way to talk to models. It's starting to open up a little bit, but with ASP.NET, your model could be anything. So we don't actually prescribe how you talk to the model. The model could be a database, it could be a web service, it could be an AS400 or a I don't know, DB2 database. It could be whatever you want. We'll talk about models in a second, but one of the things that we've neglected to talk about actually was the notion of routing. Because I kind of fibbed a little bit at the beginning. We said /home/about, and we got to the home controller and the about method. But we got there not just because of convention, but because of something that sits between the convention and us. The notion of a route. You'll see in ASP.NET MVC that there's a separation of concerns. This is a term that you'll hear Scott Gu say all the time, keeping things separate. You'll also hear the term single responsibility principle, that he wants things to have one job and one job only. So the controller's job is to control stuff. It's not to manage the database, and it's not to render views, and it's not to figure out how URLs are routed to it. It's important to think about that initial demo there where we saw the home controller and the about method get called, because it just happened. It was a miracle. It was a miracle from the perspective of the home controller. The controller doesn't know how anyone made it. In web forms, how does page load get called? Right? It's a similar kind of miracle. The page doesn't know how it happened. It wasn't the page's job to fire that thing off. It was another kind of convention. The page framework handled it. So here, we can set up these routes. We say controller, action, and ID. We set these routes up to template URIs or URLs and then route them to a particular controller and a particular action. So right now we've got controller/action/ID. This is not a regular expression. It's like a templating language. The things in curly braces are the segments. So we're saying /home/about/ and then ID. And then at the bottom there where it says new controller, that's the default. So if I don't include /about, I can see that action index is the default. If I don't include /home, then the home controller, action pose. You see, I'm paying attention. My goal is to have all pictures of Flickr be me just like Chuck Norris. Oh. I think I threw my back out there just doing that. Now notice this ID. We didn't actually use that before. That's optional. It's actually marked in ASP.NET MVC2 as being optional. Okay? Let me see. Let's do this. Let's go back over to here, and let's put in int ID. So I'm just changing the method a little bit. And then we'll run it. I just typed in /home/poop/5. So now we've added in a third aspect of things. We saw how controllers get invoked. There's a routing table that will invoke that controller. We can dig into that in a little bit. We saw that there's a thing called an action invoker that will then call the method. Now there's a thing called model binding. And in this case, it actually took that other piece of the route data and coerced it into this integer. There's nothing in the route that says that it's an int. The only thing that lines up with the route was the fact that it's called ID. Does that make sense? So just by virtue of the fact that it was called ID and then it was in the correct segment inside of that route, it showed up here. Now my parameter has been passed. I didn't call request.queryString. I didn't call request.forms. I didn't dig around inside of HTTP looking for it. It just showed up here. Now, you might think that this is kind of, again, I use that term magic or a miracle a lot, but what's nice about ASP.NET MVC is that at every single level when these things happen, you have the opportunity to affect them. This is a really important thing to remember. If you don't like the way controllers get invoked, you can change it. If you don't like the way models are bound, you can change it. If you don't like the way routes are done, you can make your own kind of route. There is a component with the single responsibility of doing one of these things at every step of the way. So while it may seem like another kind of magic, with like comparing it to web forms, you've got the complete source available, right? This is an open source thing, and you can look at the code. You can even rebuild MVC if you want to and step through it as you like. Let's try something a little more complicated. Let's go and make another route. I can name them optionally. It doesn't really matter if they're named or not. Let's say, I'll just call this by date. I'm just naming it. This can be whatever the name of the variable is. I'll call that by date. And I'm going to say, let's say datetime dot minimum. That way we can tell. And I'll come over here. Datetime by date. So there's a slightly more complex type. And you notice that that date needed to be in a culture invariant format. I didn't use the kind of American month, day, year thing. I used the standard, non-culture specific year, month, day. Of course, I could have complete control over that. If I hadn't included that, that could come back minimum. So you can start getting a sense about how you can map routes to a particular method and how we do a lot of work for you. Now, things get interesting, and here we'll get a little bit more advanced if you want to do things that are tricky. So I've got this application out there on the web called Nerd Dinner that you can download for free. And when you click on a dinner, I wanted to have this kind of smaller URL that would say /ID. Now, I could go, it used to be /dinners/details/283. I could call it pretty route, say. Go back down here. I could do this. Right? Why might this be a problem? Why might not this be a good idea? Well, it's because this is what's called a very greedy route. Because I'm saying ID, that'll match anything. So if I said /home, home's going to get passed in there. This route wants too much. Routes are managed in order. So by putting this route first, I'm going to have it grab everything, and because I made it so small, curly brace ID, it's going to just match anything. The first /home, it's gone. Now, if I put it at the end, it's never going to get called because the first route has those defaults. So routing, even with just two routes like this, can get really, really interesting and really complicated fast. Let me show you a little thing that Phil Hack, who's the program manager for ASP.NET MVC, built. You can download this route debugger from his site. He made a bunch of routes here, the foo bar route and all these different kinds of routes, just a little bit more complicated. And then he added this line on line 24. He registers his routes, and the routes are just kind of a static table. And then he rewrites them for testing. And I thought this was really, really clever. He gets it all set up. He tells ASP.NET MVC what to do. And at the last possible second, he says, no, I'll handle everything. So he routes everything back to himself. And he gives you this. So now I can say things like /foo/for. And we can really get a visualization about how routing works. Because routing is kind of the unsung hero of what's going on in MVC. We just said /foo/for, and it gets parsed away there in route data. It gets chopped up. The route data is a name-value pair collection of everything that we know about that route. In this case, it's pulled it all from the URI. And then he looks at the route table and shows you what matches and in what order. So you can see that even though it matches that first request, it also matches other ones. You see the default route here, controller/action/ID. It matches that one too, which is kind of that problem that we were having. So let's create our route over here. Make a Scott route. Okay, and I type in something like 45, and it matches that. Type in something like home, which is not what I want, matches this. So I need to constrain the route. That route's too greedy. So I can create a series of constraints. And I can say, well, ID, I need to be one or more decimals. And this is the one place where regular expressions show up. You guys know regular expressions? I think that's the... It's either D plus or that. I'm not sure. I can never remember. It's one or the other. Oh, see, look, there's an error. My bad. There we go. Whew. You're so intuitive. Sometimes there's just no better way, I'm afraid, than regular expressions. Now I just said /home again. All right. See that first one, matches constraint false. See the matches current request. See the constraint there? It didn't match that because it's not one or more decimals. And then if I did that, now it does. The neat thing about routing in this sense is that with all this back and forth I've been doing and doing different routes and trying different things, have I spent any time in the controller? You haven't at all. And this is like huge. There's so many little moments inside of ASP.NET MVC that just kind of impress me. You can change the URL structure of your entire application without having to look at your controllers. You can switch things around. I added the pretty URL thing inside of my Nerd Dinner application and never changed the app at all. I just made a route that took a single ID, and then I routed it to dinners/details. Nothing ever complained. So route tables route things to controllers. Then those controllers have their methods invoked. Those methods then do some stuff. We haven't actually done any stuff yet. And then they call a view. So let's make a little bit of a simple model here. Now the model could be a database, or it could be a class, or it could be whatever. I'm just going to make a person class. But the model is whatever .NET lets you do. So if you have an existing system that maybe doesn't use a database, it uses a web service or a mainframe or whatever, you can do that with MVC. The model is whatever objects in memory that you want it to be. So I'll say person, and I'll just say prop tab tab, string tab tab, first name enter enter, prop tab tab. It's my only skill, so it's the only thing I have to to revel in. All right, so I've got a person. Now you could see that I might want to go and make like a bunch of stuff for this person. Create, read, update, delete, and all that kind of stuff. To some extent, there are some helpers inside of MVC that let you do that. When I say add new controller, I could make a person controller. And I could say add action methods for create, read, update, delete scenarios. Hit add. And I'll get a little bit of a jump start. See, it made those. So let's go down to details. Var p equals new person. You know, I lived like 5 years of my life, 10 years of my life before I knew what that thing was. You guys know about this thing? You can start typing, la 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 la. That's what I do when I type. And then control period. And then it adds the namespace. You ever find those hotkeys where someone teaches you a hotkey and you're like embarrassed to not know it? Every day I learn some new hotkey. Microsoft people love their hotkeys. I found out recently that small tangent. You know about like, you click and you get that, right? And you go shift click and you get more, right? And that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th item, so I can go Windows 6. And I can Alt-Tab within just those things, because it's the 6th item on the list there. And then I can hit Control-Shift-Click and run it as admin. So that one's running as admin and the others aren't. Right? Ah! Maybe you guys don't find that as exciting as I do, but... All right, so I made a person here. Now I'm going to pass that person into this view here. I don't have a details view, though. So we've got the person controller. I'm going to make a new folder called person. And then I'm going to say add view. We'll say details. And we're going to make it strongly typed. I'm going to pull this down, and you see that my model appears there. Excuse me. My model appears there. And then I can pick details, and there's a bunch of templates that it comes with. And I can even select my master page. So add. And then it uses a thing called T4 that I can use to generate this code. And I'll do a really, really deep dive into T4 in the advanced talk at 4 or something. We'll get right into it, and I'll show you all the good stuff. I could go and I could say add new view. I could say index. I could make like a list one for person. It's going to generate even more code for each item in model. Okay, so here's where we start tying in our views to our controller. In model, so what is model exactly? What type is model? Take a look at that tooltip there. IEnumerable of person. Because I made a strongly typed view, let's go back to the details one because that one's easier. Take a look at what it inherits from. It inherits from view page of person. You know those really annoying people who kind of always use air quotes? You know, I kind of agree with you, but not really. Those kind of people, you know what I'm talking about? When you hang out with people like Anders a lot, and again, is he in the room? No? Good. Yeah, really like hardcore C# people will be like, yeah, I think it's like a person of T. Yeah. Yeah. Can you give me an IEnumerable of? Yeah, it's the new air quotes, except it's for nerds. Maybe we could get that to become a thing. Everyone could just try that at work and see how annoying it gets before your coworkers ask you to get out. Huh? Of T. Yeah, that's what it is. All right, well, I'm glad I'm tickled, even if it doesn't tickle you guys. So the view page is strongly typed, right? It's of type person. So model in the view page will always be of type T. I made a view page, and I made a details one specific to person. So model.firstname and model.lastname. Okay? So now I can go to, does someone just have a diet soda? Oh, I just heard it like, I'm kind of like an addict, you know? I don't know if this is the right town to be an addict in, but someone in the room just opened a soda. And do I want some? It's too late now. You've already sipped it. And I'm not quite at that level yet, but and I was just like, shh. Is it diet? Pepsi Max. That's kind of the level of addiction that I'm at right now. But they brought me an orange juice. What is that? It's not breakfast. Everyone knows breakfast is Pepsi Max. Crazy Europeans. All right. What were we talking about? Just kidding. All right. Let's go back to person controller. We pass in person P to that view. So we're inside of person controller / details. Person, details, just any ID at this point. Okay? So that's the model. That's the 3 circles. I probably could have shown you that whole thing in 5 minutes, but for it to really sink in, I think it's important to take the long route, because one learns a lot more. I passed in an ID there. I said /person /details /for. That was thrown away because, of course, my model was just me making an object. It's at that point that I would then go to the database. I probably wouldn't go to the database directly. I probably wouldn't put like select star from in my controller. I would probably have a nice model, maybe a repository pattern I can show you, and then we would go and get that. I would ask something, give me a person. I take that person back, and I control stuff. I do whatever controllers do. And then I would then pass it to the view. Now, separation of concerns is really, really important, and there's a lot of kind of philosophical and design discussions that happen even at this very, very basic level. So let's talk about a little bit of those. First, this model person, let's assume that I'm pulling it from a database and I've used Link to SQL Entity Framework. I'm passing it directly to the view. Now, in Microsoft demos like this, the Microsoft guy usually says, oh my goodness. Who is this beautiful woman who's ringing me? Ah, it's American-sized. Yeah. Yeah, I don't need this, so. 1.5 liters. No, it's 2 in the States, kids. Yes, precious. My precious. You guys watch that over the course of the day. That's going to go down. All right, thank you. That was a very nice lady. Let's all give her a round of applause. So I'm passing that person object directly into the view. Some people would say that that violates separation of concerns. In this case, the object is stupid. But in the case that it was actually connected to the database, that opens up some really interesting philosophical questions. And these are the questions that keep the MVC kind of digerati awake at night. And the great thing about them is that, as with all religious discussions, there's absolutely no right answer. But it's fun to think about. I'm passing this object. Let's say that person has a connection from the database because it was made with Link to SQL or Entity Framework. Wouldn't that mean that potentially the view could then talk to the database? Yeah, it does. The view has an object that has a connection to the database. Additionally, if I didn't want first name to go to the view, let's say that the view was being written by someone else, a designer maybe, and they only needed last name. Again, it's a religious argument, but some people will argue very fervently, only give the view what it needs, because they might show things that you wouldn't want to allow. They can argue security. Someone could somehow send some JavaScript over or do something evil and somehow encourage the view. Like, what if person wasn't what if person included this, right? Right? What if it had that? But I'm not really worried about it because I know that the view doesn't spit out credit card because I wrote it. The people who are hardcore in this will argue that that's not okay. You've just told it too much. You can't guarantee that it wouldn't somehow access that data. So they would have you create what's called a view model. And most people don't talk about view models in 101 classes because brains explode. Because then they find out that like model view controller is model view model controller, and MVVMC doesn't kind of work as a marketing term. But view models are a really, really important thing to think about. Now let's switch over and I'll show you a little bit more advanced application. We can talk about that. Let's switch over to this music store. So we'll look at his details now. So we're talking about a music store. I'll show you what the application looks like real quick. This is an application that was written by John Galloway. See? This is I feel really bad now. I don't know why that happened. Sorry, John, if you're watching this online. Good job. No. The SQL Server just took a second to fire up there. So he's got music, store stuff, and then you can look at a particular thing. So it's pretty basic wandering around a music store. Store details 1. Okay? So I can probably guess, unless he's put in custom routing, it's the store controller and the details method. Right? It's one of the nice things that if the routing isn't convoluted, you can find your way around an application pretty quickly. And then I'll hit Control, comma. I'll type in store controller. I could also type in SC, like capital SC, like Pascal casing. Or I could just type in like details. Go right there. That's the new go-to stuff inside of Visual Studio. So here's a more typical one. And what's cool about this, and what I like about the way John has written this, and John and Scott Gu have similar aesthetics because they want things to be really, really simple. If you think about what the detail is supposed to do and you compare it to what I did, right? Here's a details that actually does something. It actually goes to the database and retrieves something and returns it. And all my thing did was make an object and return it. Sometimes that's all that you need. In this case here, he's got a thing called StoreDB, and he says, go and get me a single album where that album matches the ID that I passed in. That album comes back, and then he returns it to the view, and then the view spits it out. So this is store controller details, store details. And he does a little bit of a different deal that I'll show you in the advanced talk. He calls display for model to go and display that stuff. And we'll go into that in the advanced talk in a great deal of detail. But he also includes some other stuff in more advanced sections. Let's see. I think probably the manager would be a good place to look. Here we go. Edit. Delete. Let's look at create. So this is the create method when you're logged in as a manager. And this is kind of cool because it fits exactly on one line there. So there's a couple of things we can see here. That first line, line 44, it says HTTP post. That's a way of marking a method and only allowing it to be called on a post. So what you can do is you can have a method that has the same name. You can have overloads. So you actually have two methods called create, one for the get and one for the post. So you can have /album/create as a route, and it'll go to the right method based entirely on whether it's a get or a post, which is kind of cool. And he goes and he says, try to add this album to album, save the changes, and then if it fails, look what he does there on line 59. He's got a view model. So there's two interesting things here. One is there's the philosophical argument of people who think you should always pass in a view model, meaning a customized object with just the stuff that your view needs. And then there's the when I really just have no choice and I have to do it. So in this case, his create page, when an error happens, needs to know more about stuff than just one object. He needs to know about the album, but he also needs a list of genres, and he needs a list of artists. So he makes a composite object that is a view model. Except, again, the people who care about this stuff would argue that, but he's just passing in database objects within another object, and they still are attached to the database, which is true. And you have to decide for yourselves as you start designing applications how fervent you want to buy into that argument. Okay, on the one side, there's just get your objects the way you want them and pass them to the view. And those objects will very likely be from the database or they'll be from wherever. Then there's the model that this thing takes, which is pass those objects to the view when they look exactly like what you need. And then if you need something special, make a view model and stick those objects inside. And then getting kind of more and more to the extreme, not necessarily where extreme is bad, but where it's just going to cost you more work, is make custom objects for every single thing and copy from the model into the view model. So I would have an album, and then I'd have a album view model. So for every single kind of object, and then I would go copy, 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 copy. For simple applications, that might be a lot of what I call left-hand, right-hand code. Album dot first, album dot title equals view model album dot title. Da, 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 da. For advanced scenarios, you might use a tool called Auto Mapper, which is a tool that uses kind of reflection and looks at two objects and goes and then does that. It makes that noise too when it does it, and it'll figure it out. And Auto Mapper is cool for other things where you have an object that has like first name and last name, and another one has first name and surname, and you want them to map together, and Auto Mapper can be configured to do those kind of things. But again, it's a big philosophical discussion. It's going to create a lot more code for you. Now, what John did in this application, which is kind of a middle of the road, is he created a models, views, and view models. So at least he kept them somewhere. He gave them all a convention. This is not something specific to MVC. It's more of a philosophical discussion. But they're really simple objects. Right? A shopping cart has a list of cart items. In this case here, he made a details one that only includes album. This is where I think it gets a little weird. And this is, again, up for you to decide, but it's something to think about. The salient point is, though, you need to pass in information into your view that lets the view do its job. And it's really important to remember that the view's job is only to display stuff. It's not to do calculations. It's not to think about things. Views should be limited to basically for loops and the occasional if. I'll show you let's look at a couple of his views. So details, spit out a link, spit out the model. Index for each list of genres and genres. Right? It's that kind of stuff. If you find yourself doing tax calculations inside of a view, stop. That is not the view's job. What you would do is that you would then do that calculation in the controller. Maybe if it was a shopping cart, right? Let's say you have a shopping cart object. You'd total those up and pass the shopping cart stuff with the total and whatever additional information into a view model and then pass that along for the ride. If the data isn't pre-chewed by the time that gets to the view, it needs to be. The view's job is not to make those calculations. Does that make sense? It's an interesting discussion because it also allows you to reuse those views. You can have strongly typed views, like in this case where John has a view of type store index view model, but you can also have now in ASP NET MVC view of type dynamic. And you can so it's like a just-in-time object that you can use. There's also the notion of a view data, which we used earlier here. There's a lot of prescriptive guidance in MVC, but there's a lot of places where we just can't make the decision for you, and you have to figure it out. Now, view data is a place where you can stick something like a hash table, and it'll be on the other side. So in this example, I say view data, and I pass in message. I put a bit of text in that inside of home index. Oops. Let's go over to index. And then we pull it out again here. I find that a little uncomfortable. I don't really like that. It might be convenient for passing the occasional string out. It's kind of like a trap door that you can use to get yourself out of a tight situation, but it's not something you'd want to use on a regular basis because you're just throwing some data into something with a string key. But if you've got an existing view and you've already got it working and you just need one additional piece of information, I could see where someone could potentially use it. But as with all things that use strings, that's still going to compile. And you're never going to know until it goes bad for you. Which brings me to another point about views. In this example here, we're using a view engine. View engines are the thing that generates the angle brackets. And you have the choice to use multiple view engines, although most people never know that anything else exists other than what we come with. This is called the Web Forms view engine. And this is an unfortunate name because it makes you think that Web Forms is involved somehow. But the idea is that we needed a view that you could express your HTML in and some of your code. We needed designer support. We needed a nice editor. We had all of that already lying around with Web Forms. So is this a web form, this index.aspx, kind of technically under the covers? Except, this is really important, there's no postbacks. You can't even count on there being events. And what do you notice about the ones that are sitting there on the right-hand side in the Solution Explorer? The little plus sign that you're used to seeing that has a code behind? There are no code behinds in these. So, you're smart people, so you can get this, but maybe your coworkers won't, so you might need to explain it to them. It looks like an ASPX. It's called the Web Forms view engine, but don't think of it like that, because it's just not. This is just a view engine that knows how to generate angle brackets, and it looks and feels like Web Forms. Some people will try to put a code behind in there. But think about all we've learned so far and how a code behind would break the single responsibility principles. Think about all the evil that you could do if you were in a code behind. Suddenly it would become a controller of its own and you'd be off and doing all sorts of bad stuff. Separation of concerns is the most important thing to remember about ASP.NET MVC. The routing table does what it does. It knows how to route things, and that's it. Controllers don't know who called them. This is a really important thing. We didn't talk about testing, but it's important to note that if a controller got a method called and it doesn't care who called it, then you could go and call it inside of a test. And that's how testing works in ASP.NET MVC. Let's see if John included any tests. Oh. Denied. Let's bring up Nerd Dinner. I'll show you one or two tests just to get the idea. Because if you've ever tried to do testing before, if you've ever tried to do testing in web forms, it sucks. All right, so there's like a really, really, really basic test. This is testing this is part of Nerd Dinner, but new home controller, call the method, and then a view result comes back. And then I look at that and tell if it's not null. Other things that I might want to do would be assert that the view model looks right. I might want to assert that the view that came back was the one that I wanted. I mean, all the different tests that you could potentially do. What's significant about showing you this is that thing on line 27, where I new up a controller. That's the first time you've ever seen anybody new up a controller, right? This whole time, no one has ever said controller C equals new controller, right? That's been happening automatically. So when you're running ASP.NET MVC, your controllers get made and your methods get called. But when you're doing it in testing, you have to make the controllers and you have to call the methods and then assert the results. But it also underscores how important it is to have separation of concerns. What would happen if your controller said response.write? Would it work at runtime? Sure, absolutely. You're inside of ASP.NET, you're inside of IIS, it would totally work. Is that its responsibility? No. Would it break in the test? Absolutely. Because there is no response object. There's no HTTP context. This test is going to run without a web server. So you want to make sure that your controllers, even though they may do lots and lots and lots of stuff, that they don't go and touch external resources that they don't have access to. Separation of concerns. They do that one thing that they focus on. You can test your routes, you can test your controllers, you can test your models, but make sure that you're testing functionality, that you're testing that user story and not indirectly calling something like the web server. Now, we didn't talk about view results. Let's speak about that for a second. This is actually kind of an interesting point to end on, because it shows you how much thought that the guys have been putting into making this thing really smart about separation of concerns. In previous versions of ASP.NET MVC, early versions, when they were first doing this, your methods looked like this. So I've got this thing called, and everything we just talked about worked. You know, someone would make a controller, someone would call details, and then you'd call view. But think about the call stack, and this is where I bring it all the way around to what we talked about before. Think about what the call stack would look like here. I'm going to call view. Which way does that send me up the call stack, up or down? It makes me go up one more. And now I'm in the view method. And what's the detail, what's person controller details doing? It's down one in the call stack, sitting around waiting for me to finish. And what do views do? Well, they talk to IIS and they spit things out to the web server, and they response.write, and they talk to, they do all that kind of stuff that is specific to rendering angle brackets. So they needed to figure out a way to get out of here. So rather than actually doing it, rather than actually saying, view, make the view right now, they say return view, where the view returns something that is derived from action result. In this case, it's called a view result. And that view result isn't actually the result of the view doing its thing. The view didn't actually render. It's an expression of their intent to do that view. But by virtue of the fact that they returned, where does the call stack go? Right? They get to let go, and the controller is not involved anymore. The controller did all of its work up until the point where it called the view, and then rather than actually doing it, it kind of put together a letter. This is my intent to call a view. I'll be passing you this view model. Goodbye. I wish you and your family well. And then it backs off the call stack. And then the ASP.NET MVC runtime then looks at that letter and says, oh, I guess I need to call this view. And then it goes forward in the call stack. And it is that change from that void to action result, from calling view directly to return, that enables you to do that kind of testing that we just saw a second ago and makes the whole system work in a really cool way. How could I have tested that? If that returned a void, I'd be stuck. So the guys in the ASP.NET MVC team are putting a lot of thought into trying to keep things clean, trying to keep things modular, and trying to keep things to have a single responsibility. We saw how you hit a URL, it goes through routing. Routing can be fairly complicated to understand, but there are debuggers to allow you to visualize that. Routing is incredibly flexible. Routes happen in the order that they are listed. So you want to think about greedy routes and how you want to lay those out. We saw how to make controllers and how you can have a controller is named something controller, home controller, whatever controller, and that's a convention. That the methods and the controllers then map to folders in the views directory, so home controller, home views, person controller, person views, details method, details view. We saw how those things mapped. We saw how you can have a view that is a loosely typed view, where you can just pass view data in hash tables, or you can make a strongly typed view, where you can have view page of person. We saw how then you spin through that information in the view. Maybe you pass it a view model that has additional information that you want it to do. You see, at all of the different points here, there is an understanding that HTTP and that the web is there. ASP.NET MVC values HTTP. We saw how there was a controller that had HTTP post listed on it. Web Forms values the control model, the abstraction, the fully encapsulated chunk of functionality, drag a data grid, double click, everything's nice and organized. That doesn't exist in the MVC world. MVC really values HTTP. If you like doing JavaScript, if you like HTML, then you want to spend some time with MVC. If you like that more kind of more productive but less detail-oriented perspective, then you want to go with Web Forms. If you want to kind of get stuff done and you want to make a beautiful site that maybe isn't beautiful when you say view source, but it works, think about Web Forms. I always use the analogy car versus motorcycle. You can't look at a person who drives a car and say that's a bad person and I don't like that person. No one should ever drive a car. People who drive cars or minivans value different things. They want to be able to put all the kids and take them to football practice and get groceries. You can't take 5 kids to football practice and buy groceries on a motorcycle. If you're on a motorcycle, you value different things, but they're both kinds of vehicles. The same thing exists in Web Forms versus MVC. MVC values testing, single responsibility, separation of concerns, HTTP, JavaScript, and HTML. Web Forms values the control model, the event abstraction, the big ecosystem of all the different controls that you could potentially get, server-side eventing. SharePoint is Web Forms. MVC is kind of that new, different way of doing things. So this has been Introduction to ASP.NET MVC. Fritz Onion has a talk, I think around 3-ish, where he's going to talk about if you have an existing Web Forms application and you want to move it over to MVC, what that would look like. It's not a straight migration, but he'll give you all those details. And then we'll do the Ninja MVC tips and tricks later in the afternoon around 4-ish. We'll talk about model binders, writing your own model binders, writing your own action results. We'll talk about T4 and code generation and all how those templates work, and a pile of other much more low-level stuff. Thank you very much.